Hello Dave, nice having you here to Metal Wani. How are you?
Hello. I'm good, thanks. I'm good. I was just thinking, it looks like there's going to be a storm outside here where I am, so I'm quite excited. Hopefully you might get some sound effects in the background in a bit.
Yeah. Well, Anaal Nathrakh new record titled A New Kind of Horror will be unleashed in the next month. Aggression and Anaal Nathrakh go hand in hand. There's no looking back at all. You guys have been turning out quality metal music album after album, to say so. What is it that inspires the band to maintain it instead of releasing just another metal album, which is common in the metal scene today?
I think we still think about everything. We still think about the music we make the same way that we did when we recorded our first demo, or our first album. Perhaps we work a little bit differently. Perhaps we know how to put songs together better or something like that. But we're still excited by what we do. We still get fascinated with what we're doing, and I think part of that is, like you say, we've been going for a while now, but we don't notice that. Some people, I think, if they've been doing this for some time, they sort of feel, they feel like veterans. They feel like they look back over their career and perhaps they're rightfully proud of it, but they get a certain sort of laid back sense about it all, and for them that's fine, but we're definitely not like that. We're still nervous and excited and anxious to do what we're doing now and what we might do next, and we pretty much never look back, and I think that's part of why hopefully we stay kind of fresh, because to us it's still very much fresh to us every time.
Yeah. Well, Anaal Nathrakh is a band that has always defied rules and proved that one doesn't need to look back at the previous albums for inspirations. After listening to A New Kind of Horror a few times, it was clear that the album maintains the organic nature of songwriting. Each and every track has a human touch to it than a robotic feel, to say it this way. How important is it for you to keep the songwriting and production as organic and without any master plans?
I'm not sure whether I could say that it's important. It's simply how we do it. I think it can be important in terms of the way that the finished result comes across, but the bottom line is we do it all very instinctively. We always have done. So everything we write, we don't plan in advance that much. We try to get the right feeling in our hearts and minds, and then just sort of let it out in the form of music. And I think that, the word organic is probably a good one. I think that way of doing things means that the music itself is more immediate for people who then hear it afterwards. We don't just throw any old shit at the wall. We try to make sure that it's all really good stuff, but we don't overthink it in advance. We let the songs be what they want to be, kind of thing, and hopefully that comes across as a more visceral, a more immediate experience for the listener, and that's pretty much the only way that we know how to do it, because I think if we were to start trying to plan things and being really clever about everything, it would start to lose its identity as Anaal Nathrakh. I know other people work differently. I remember reading years ago that is it Carl from the band Nile? Apparently he'd spent like a year or something writing out the music parts and everything for an album that they recorded. This was a long time ago, but he got this really meticulous approach, and that works for them. Good for them. Everyone needs to work differently to play to their strengths, but for us, this instinctive sort of way of doing things, this quite as you say, organic way of doing things. Just feels right, and we're happy with the way things turn out.
Yeah. Give us a little insight about the concept behind this album.
Well, I mean, it's a mixture of different concepts. It's not really a concept album in the way that, like, I don't know, an old King Diamond album is like all one story. But there are a few like headline themes that run through a lot of it, and probably the most important one is World War One. Obviously, it's 100 years since World War One ended. And for a long time we've been, both Mick and I, we've been sort of morbidly fascinated by World War One a bit. Not necessarily in terms of the minutiae of the history, but just in terms of trying to get our heads around what it must have been like to be involved with it. And it's, between Mick and myself, we pretty much can't think of a better description than hell on earth, it seems to us. The kind of, the trench warfare and everything. It's always been utterly horrifying, but at the same time sort of fascinating to us. And because it's 100 years ago, that's one reason to reflect on that. But another reason to reflect on it is the extent to which the people involved back then, those people that you sometimes see in photographs or works of art or that you read about in books, they are, it seems to us, they are us, basically. There is so little difference really between us, so it's quite easy sometimes, we're talking about something that was 100 years ago, it's quite easy to feel very separated from things that happened that long ago. But I think that's a false separation. Those people could so easily be us, and our world could very easily come to resemble theirs in some quite frightening ways, I think. So reflecting on that is part of it, and as a result, one of the big inspirations on the album is war poetry from back then, to try and evoke the powerful sense of what those people's experience was like. And just like I say, there are other aspects to the themes, but that's probably the strongest one to pick up on first. And if anyone who consumes this interview eventually has the chance, there's quite a lot of information in the liner notes about some of the other aspects. I went to some lengths to include notes on stuff, so there's plenty more to find out if you pick up a copy of the album as well.
Yeah, indeed. Actually, there's this element of horror which we still face today. So this 100 years ago, So, as mentioned before, your music and the lyrics reflects the world. What's your take on the current state of the world, with people fighting against each other, threatening nuclear attacks, executing mass chemicals attacks on people?
Yeah, I mean, it's, as you point out, it's the title of the album, A New Kind of Horror, is partly to draw the parallels between that stuff 100 years ago and what's going on today. And there are always new kinds of horror. We don't seem to learn from armed conflict. We don't seem to learn how to avoid doing it. We always do it again, but we do learn how to do it a lot better. And that's probably the most frightening thing about it. We are now so much better at exterminating thousands and thousands of people at once than we were 100 years ago, and that's really a new kind of horror in itself, I think. So yeah, now one of the things that we had in mind on the album was the fact that recently Russia unveiled a new missile technology platform that can apparently, I can't remember the exact statistics, but it can basically kill everyone immediately. And that's the fact that that's Russia and I live in the UK means nothing to me. The fact that it exists on the planet is the important thing to take away. And yeah, the chlorine gas that was one of the new kinds of horror in World War One was in the news not that long ago for having been used in Syria and possibly in other places, and it's just horrifying. But one thing that I think is particularly interesting to draw out of all of this, there are horrific things that there's never stopped being horrific things going on. But one thing that I do think is different right now in 2018 compared to 10 or 15 years ago or whatever, it does seem that everything is a little bit more dangerous now. It seems that way to me, anyway. In the late 90s, for example, there were still conflicts going on in the world, but it definitely seems more likely today that some insane, crazy person is going to fire a nuclear missile or invade the wrong country or something crazy like that's going to happen. It seems more likely now than it has done for quite a long time. There's a slightly hysterical aspect to the way that those events are unfolding, it seems to me. So it's kind of like the world itself seems to produce a lot of great material for Anaal Nathrakh to reflect on, but it would almost be better not to have that material, if you see what I mean. It's kind of like a satire comedian or something. They poke fun at the insanities of the world, but it's not because they want the world to be an ever more insane place. It's almost as if all of this subject matter that we deal with in Anaal Nathrakh we're driven to do it out of horror.
Yeah, well, your music is violent, is terrifying, also sarcastic, raw, and not happy. So what importance these themes have into Anaal Nathrakh music? Well,
I mean, obviously it's written out of those themes. I mean, the input that they have, typically when we're starting to get the feeling that it's time to make an album, Mick and I will start talking to one another. I mean, obviously we talk to one another anyway, but we talk to one another a bit more specifically, like where are we feeling that this album is going to come from, where is it going to go, get some inspirations together. So all of the stuff that I was just talking about was started to filter into our conversations. We kind of make we almost kind of like a frame in our minds, kind of thing, and we talk about all of this kind of thing, and then we fill up that frame, and it gives us the feeling that will guide the album. And that was the case. Everything that I was just talking about was all part of that, along with some other stuff. I mean, one of the big influences was art. This time around, various different people like Otto Dix, who's a German painter from years ago, and stuff like that, all swirling around. So yeah, all of this is reflected in the music as part of its inspiration.
Yeah. On this new album you have Brandon of Bleeding Through as a guest vocalist on one song, on the 7th track if I'm not wrong. How was to collaborate with him?
It was cool. He's been a good friend of Mick's for a long time. Mick lives quite nearby him in California, and yeah, they hang out and whatnot. So and they've worked together before as well. So it's very much a case of having a friend round to do it. But yeah, he came over to the studio. We had a good laugh. And yeah, it's a pleasure to have him involved. It's nice to be able to call people who are in some quite big bands and stuff friends, but we're not very interested about the fact that they're in a band. We're more interested in the fact that they're our friends, if that makes sense. So yeah, obviously Brandon knows what he's doing with the microphone, but from our point of view, it was just cool to have him involved.
Yeah. But in the past you used to work with Attila of Mayhem. Do you have in mind to work with him again in the future?
That could certainly be cool if we did. We don't currently have it in mind to do so, no. But, you know, we haven't actually got very much of the future in mind at all. We'll see when it happens. But yeah, that was... Oh, crikey. That was back when we did like our second release, I think, was the one where we had Attila over to record with us. And yeah, he's he's an individual sort of individual. He's very much, he's Attila and he's not anybody else. So it's always curious and kind of fun to interact with him, and because you're never quite sure what he's going to come out with. But yeah, we'd happily work with him again if the opportunity arose. Fingers crossed. You never know.
Yeah, exactly. So, any touring plans for this fall or maybe for the next year?
Sorry, say that again?
Any touring plans for this fall or maybe for the next year?
Yeah, we've got some dates in the UK and Europe in November. Simply because the album comes out at the end of September, so that seemed like a good time to follow it up. And then we're in the new year, late February, we're off to Japan for some shows over there. And we've got the tricky thing is I'm always talking to agents and sorting things out for shows and that, but I can never remember what I'm allowed to announce. I don't know what I'm allowed to say that we're doing, because the way these things work, you have to announce it at the same time. But yeah, into the new year we've got that Japan stuff, and then we've got festivals lined up and a couple more places that we'll be touring. So yeah, we're going to be quite active over the next 12 months or so.
Yeah, well, maybe you will be back in Romania, in Bucharest, to see you.
That would be superb if we could. We had a really cool time the last time we were in Romania. So yeah, it'd be great to go back again.
Yeah, last time you have had the show in Brașov City.
Exactly. Yeah, and it was cool getting to meet some of the people there, because there was. It was almost like an anniversary kind of thing. A lot of the people had been there when there was this horrific disaster at a club that I think had been in Budapest about a year before. And so speaking to some of the guys who'd survived that, and just getting to know a couple of them and hearing some of those stories was particularly fascinating. But other than that, yeah, we've always had a good time in that part of the world. Obviously I've been there over the years with Benediction as well, and always enjoyed it. So yeah, if we could get back, we'd be really happy.
Yeah, well, I could attend the show back then to travel to Brașov, but maybe soon you will be in Bucharest.
Yeah, maybe, fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dave, for this interview. It was my pleasure. All the best to you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Cheers.